Kia ora. I'm Elizabeth Pretty, and on behalf of the New Zealand Association of Resource Management, thank you for registering for today's webinar on community-based freshwater monitoring. For those of you who are not familiar, NZARM is an association for professionals involved in natural resource management, particularly in the land and water space. NZARM webinars are produced out of the NZARM Capability Building Project, a 3-year program where NZARM has partnered with the Ministry for the Environment and regional councils to support the upskilling of individuals across the sector. We are lucky enough today to have a team of presenters, Kim Jones, co-director and freshwater lead at the Mountains to Sea Conservation Trust, Juliet Milne, a principal scientist with Traverse Environmental, and Shelley McMurtrie, a director and principal scientist at EOS Ecology. Before I hand over, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the Q&A function at the top of your screens, and we will answer these towards the end. Thanks again for registering, and I will now pass over to Kim.
Kia ora, thanks Eliza. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, ko Kim Jones tōku ingoa, nō whāngarei ahau, he kaimahi ahau nō Mountains to Sea Conservation Trust. Thank you to NZARM for putting this webinar on, first of all, and welcome to you all. Thanks for coming along. As Eliza mentioned, this webinar is about community-based freshwater monitoring and some of the initiatives and tools that are available and in development in that space and how they connect. I'll be speaking first about Mountains to Sea and what we do through our Wai Connection project that supports community-based monitoring. Then Juliet, lead author on Make Your Stream Data Count, will speak about the National QA framework and the tool that's now available for community-based data. Shelley from EOS Ecology, Wai Connection's National Technical Support Team, will bring us home by covering off the development of a national community-based monitoring portal and website that helps to implement the National Quality Assurance tool. And she'll also talk about the Focus Catchment Map series that have been developed for Wai Connection catchment groups and how that is assisting catchment and community groups working in community-based monitoring. So a little bit of background, Mountains to Sea was founded back in 2002 as an umbrella for our 2 foundation environmental education and engagement programs, which are offered nationally through a train-the-trainer engagement and endorsement model. Our 3 strategic PO or pillars are Te Taio, Tangata and Organisational Sustainability. Our overarching goal is to empower and support communities to achieve their marine and freshwater conservation aims through science-based experiential programs, resources, projects and community engagement. So Wai Connection is the name of the foundation program for freshwater, where local schools and community members learn about freshwater, including the unique life cycle and habitat requirements of galaxids and what actions can be taken to help turn around the population decline of the galaxids that we know as whitebait. In our Marine Foundation program, EMR, we connect communities with the catchment's receiving environments through engaging activities that help us to experience the effect that issues upstream can have on our marine ecosystems. We're an adventure activity accredited organisation, so we can do these things safely with an excellent safety record as well, which is pretty important. We've got loads of community engagement and capacity and capability building services on offer. This list here is not exhaustive, but it sort of helps to give you an idea of some of the frameworks and services that we've helped to develop over the years. So community-based monitoring, the focus of this talk, this is another key service that our teams can support community and catchment groups with. We find it's effective because it really helps to bring communities together around the why, bring the tools to better understand what is happening in the ecosystem and introduces that whole of catchment approach from the mountains to the sea. We've helped to train a network of community-based monitoring trainers around New Zealand, developed a national whitebait habitat monitoring and restoration program alongside EOS Ecology, and helped to link groups to local experts, and more recently done some innovative work in the community-based monitoring marine space as well, with reef monitoring and restoration. The development of all of these programs, projects, frameworks and networks has put us in good stead to create the Wai Connection project. So Wai Connection, Tātai ki te Wai, is a Mountains to Sea community catchment group engagement and support project that kicked off last year in 2023. It's funded largely by the Ministry for the Environment's Essential Freshwater Fund and delivered through a range of partners or provider organisations nationally. So, as many of you know, the government's Essential Freshwater Package aims to improve freshwater outcomes, and particularly in this round to build capability and capacity in New Zealand's freshwater management area by empowering better equipped and knowledgeable catchment groups. And Wai Connection falls into the catchment group component of the 6 EFF packages you can see here. Wai Connection is currently funded to run until the end of June 2025. And the network within it assists with building a strong foundation for lasting results, which is essential for assisting regional councils to successfully implement that EF package in partnership with community. In the first year of the Wai Connection project, we rolled things out in the regions where we've got existing provider organisations, as well as in 2 pilot regions, being Hawke's Bay and Taranaki. Now in the second year, we're rolling it out into new regions, including Manawatu, Otago and Southern, where we've recently partnered with catchment collectives. So Mountains to Sea provides the national support to these provider organisations through coordination, training and endorsement for delivery of selected programs, project management and reporting. And EOS Ecology, that's based in Canterbury, is providing national technical support. And this includes helping to develop project science and resource content at a national level, providing science, GIS data and design capabilities to all active regions for the course of the project. And Shelley's going to talk more about this later in the webinar. So focus catchment map series are provided for some of the catchment groups that we're working with, and along with the community-based freshwater monitoring portal, these 2 things you can see here in this slide are outputs of the project, and Shelley's going to talk more about this later in the webinar as well. The Wai Connection website, so waiconnection.nz, is online, and it's a source of information for our providers through a provider portal as well as stakeholders. There's resources that have been developed through the project which are available online for anyone. Some of those are up on the screen now. So trained catchment coordinators through Wai Connection, among other things, can assist catchment and community groups with monitoring, plan development, implementation and interpretation for community-based freshwater monitoring, or help to source expert support where needed. The work that Juliet has been a part of with that she's going to share shortly on has been really crucial to this part of the work. Wai Connections help to get more boots onto the ground and to better resource existing boots on the ground. And these boots are helping to support catchment groups and community groups with a really wide variety of support. Some of what's been achieved so far in year 1 with the project includes actually smashing that target of working with 100 catchment groups over 2 years. We've already worked with 193 in the first year. And that number is set to climb in year 2. And over 94,000 hours have been worked to date. Of those 193 catchment groups I mentioned that we've been working with, 21 of them are new. So the bulk of them were existing groups that we've been supported. And 66 catchment coordinators have received training through the project, including community-based freshwater monitoring trainer training. And what this shows us is that there's a much stronger network around the country, and there's a really strong need for this work. Juliet and Shelley have been helping with this training that, coupled with Juliet's work on the National Quality Assurance Framework for community-based monitoring data, has been very much appreciated by all involved. So that's all from me for now, but I'll be staying around to help answer questions later on, and I'll pass across to Juliet now to talk about the National Quality Assurance Framework.
Thanks, Kim. Kia ora koutou. Make your stream monitoring data count. This is the name of the new National Quality Assurance Framework developed for community-based stream monitoring. The framework was championed by Greater Wellington Regional Council and developed by NIWA on behalf of all regional councils with NB Envirolink tool funding. But a wide range of government, not-for-profit, industry and commercial partners and collaborators have all contributed in some way to make sure this is a truly national framework. And of course, the Wai Connection program is playing a key role with framework implementation. The CBM framework was developed to support community and catchment monitoring groups to collect fit-for-purpose data that's of a known quality. And we've got 4 key resources: a monitoring and quality plan template, a guidance manual, a background document that establishes the technical basis for the framework, and a set of electronic field form templates. There were several drivers for developing the national framework. Firstly, community-based monitoring has just continued to grow in New Zealand in the past decade, and regional councils and other organisations were wanting to provide more support and resources for groups. Kim's already mentioned the number of coordinators that have received CBM training. Shelley's going to talk shortly about Wai Connection's stocktake of catchment groups in New Zealand. And in addition to that, Kati Doering and I recently prepared a short report for the Our Land and Water National Science Challenge that provides a summary snapshot of the specific monitoring activities of 10 catchment groups or collectives. One of the collectives we looked at was the Rangatiki Rivers Catchment Collective in the Lower North Island. Within this collective, there's 23 catchment groups that collectively monitor 103 sites for water quality each month. Obviously, this is many times more number of sites than regional council can monitor. And so it offers spatial detail that will improve current understanding of water quality across the monitored catchments. And the level of detail could also inform a range of applications such as freshwater farm planning and validation of catchment or regional scale models, and particularly because many of these catchment groups now have 5 years of their monthly data. But as much as anything, the framework is about providing a means to both recognise and value CBM. It's about supporting and empowering communities to learn about freshwater and meaningfully participate in catchment-based freshwater management. The framework recognises that community and catchment groups collect data for different purposes, and this is sort of illustrated here with 3 primary data use categories: engagement and education on the left, and that might be, as for example, a field day to raise awareness about a particular issue; investigations and surveillance, which captures things like screening for pollution hotspots on a farm or identifying the impact of a particular land use activity on stream health. And we have informing regulatory processes, so things like contributing data to support freshwater policy development. Now, in reality, this diagram is a continuum, so time, cost, and quality assurance requirements increase as you move from engagement and education activities on the left across to informing regulatory processes on the right. We designed the framework to support groups to select measurement methods and quality checks that are suitable for their intended monitoring purpose and data use, whilst also considering the time and the cost and complexity involved with each method. So for most indicators in the framework, there's more than one measurement method available, and that simply recognises that different monitoring purposes may call for different methods. Now, the methods we've included, and you can see some of those on the bottom of the slide, they are drawn from existing well-established community monitoring kits and national guidance and monitoring standards. The framework's built around a standard set of observations that are important to record on each monitoring occasion, and a menu of 28 indicators of stream health. And the indicators that you see listed here, they are relevant to different aspects of freshwater values and freshwater management and the interests of community groups. We hope we can grow this suite over time. Now, what indicators a group chooses to monitor obviously should depend on what their monitoring purpose or question is. So just to give you an example, if a group was particularly interested in the suitability of a stream for swimming, and we worked with a group in the Hutt Valley a few years ago, and this was of interest to them. So in this instance here, these indicators marked in red are examples of what they might choose to monitor for indicators. The national framework has a strong focus on the planning phase of a monitoring program. Now that's deliberate. It's to ensure that the monitoring part will then be done well. So the first and most important component of the framework is the monitoring and quality plan template. Can't stress enough how critical it is to establish a clear reason or purpose for monitoring. I call this knowing your why. And that's because what will be monitored, where, how, and when all need to be driven by the monitoring purpose or questions. And often this is an iterative process too. I just want to show that the plan is an electronic template. It's available in both Excel and Google Sheets format. This shows the front overview page that's listing the 7 forms that make up the plan. Just to look at those 7 forms down here a bit closer, Some of these forms have questions or fields in the template that are mandatory. So things like the names of your sites and what you're going to measure and the methods you're going to use. And these mandatory questions form what we call the minimum essential information. That information is needed if a community group is going to use the electronic field forms that are associated with the framework. And also that information is needed if a group wants their data to be considered for use by others. And that makes sense. You know, for a council, for example, to make use of catchment groups data, the results alone aren't enough. They want to know how you've collected it and what kind of checks and things have been in place. So answers on all the mandatory questions on these forms auto-populate into a summary form on the right, Form H. So if a group doesn't want to share their entire monitoring plan, they can just share that minimum essential information. So just returning to and expanding this diagram that put up earlier, how much effort should be put into the monitoring and quality plan, as well as the training and quality checks, is guided by the intended monitoring purpose and data use. So obviously, as you move across from the left to the right, greater effort is required. Let's just take a look at the guidance document now. We've designed this to help assist with completing the monitoring plan, and it's primarily targeted at people and organisations that support catchment and community groups, such as catchment coordinators, and I imagine we've got plenty of you on the line today. So we're talking generally about people that know a bit about streams, but they aren't necessarily a scientist. Now, Section 3 of the guidance overviews the monitoring plan, and it links with Sections 4 and 5 for more specific details on measurement methods and quality checks that relate to each of the 28 stream health indicators. This is what the general layout looks like for each indicator in the guidance. In this case, we've got nitrate, nitrogen. We have the general layout for each indicator. Measurement methods, what the general data use categories each method aligns with, information on the equipment and costs, and an indication of the time and complexity involved with each method. Now, of course, for nitrate, irrespective of whether you're measuring that with a self-test kit or by the lab, a water sample needs to be collected. So we also have water sample collection and testing considerations also covered. Now, for the training and quality checks part, that directs you to a table in Section 5, again set out for each of the indicators. So if we just take a look there, this one here is taking water sample collection. The recommended training is listed along with what to record and a list of internal and external quality checks that can be made. So you pick and choose from these. To make life easier, the electronic field forms prompt the key information to be recorded, and I'll cover that shortly. The guidance document also includes explanatory boxes and diagrams, in this case to support good water sample collection. So if we actually now move to the testing, if you were to do the self-testing with nitrate, you've got a similar amount of information here. Where can you go for training? What do you need to record? What quality checks are there? And then some tips of how do you get the best out of your test kits. And if we have a look now at the electronic data collection, the national framework incorporates templates for use on a mobile phone, a tablet, laptop or desktop computer. We've built these forms using ArcGIS Survey 123 software, and that's because it's very well supported and it's very widely used by many organisations in New Zealand. The forms allow efficient, standardised capture of field measurements and observations, and they incorporate built-in automated quality checks and calculations that save time. The forms are free to use, but they require an organisation with an ArcGIS licence to host the survey for a particular group. And as I mentioned earlier, the host organisation needs some minimum essential information so they can customise the forms with the group's name and monitoring sites, and then provide a link to those survey forms. And no, you don't need cell phone coverage in the field, or do you need to use your valuable mobile data out in the field? You do have the option of collecting data offline and uploading it later. And just to take a sneak peek at the actual data collection, this image is just showing the 4 different survey forms once downloaded onto your phone. So the different forms there contain different indicators. If we open the first form, which is the main one that has all of the water quality testing, this is the front page you'll see. Now, the host organisation, this was a trial as part of developing this tool, and the host organisation was NIWA, where I was working, and we had the Friends of the Maitai River, and they had already provided us with information on where they were monitoring so that we could customise their form for them. So no more entering site names every time you go out in the field onto a paper form. This next screen just illustrates some of the standard observations to be captured by simple selection options. Groups can also upload photos, and then the form actually moves to specific indicators where the group, you just tick which indicators you're measuring, and then the relevant pages load in the background. And here's an example of that. And this time we're looking at stream habitat quality, the relevant details. So the group will pick physical habitat quality there. The relevant details for that method will select their method, and then the details for that method will populate. You can see what we've done here, the method brought up, was we've made use of large numbers and keypads for easier data entry. And for this particular indicator, groups can also see their stream habitat score being calculated as they progress across the survey questions. And just finally, with this diagram, I just wanted to illustrate data collection under the national framework, and that's the top half above the red dashed line. That's where the framework starts and finishes. The lower half of the diagram is, I guess, the exciting new territory that the framework has facilitated in terms of catchment groups now being able to view, interpret, and if they wish, share data with others. So this is the beauty of an ArcGIS-based platform, because it links with so many other products for visualizing and interacting with data. And Shelley's going to talk in a couple of minutes about how that can be done. And I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to leave it there, other than to say that the CBM resources, including summary materials, can all be found on the Wai Connection website. And watch this space. There's a new extension piece of work just getting underway with Greater Wellington Regional Council, where we will be developing some guidance to support catchment groups so that they can interpret stream monitoring data for themselves. And Shelley, I'm going to hand over to you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Shelley McMurtrie ahau. I'm the Principal Scientist at EOS Ecology and the National Technical Support Team Manager for the Wai Connection project. As both Kim and Juliet have mentioned, I'm here to talk about a couple of different outputs that fall under the Wai Connection project, the first of those being the scoping phase of a community-based freshwater monitoring website. For those of you who haven't heard of EOS, we're a science and engagement organisation that provides expertise in surface water ecology, public engagement and science communication, and we've sort of been kicking around for around about 25 years. For the development of the CBFM scoping document, we also teamed up with Datacom and Pointer Digital, and they're tech companies that design, build and run IT systems and processes. We were tasked with looking into developing a citizen science hub site. That's what you can see on the left side of the screen, and what we call the CBM portal, and a site to house community-based freshwater monitoring data, which we call the CBFM website. The intent is that these sites would have a life well beyond that of Wai Connection. So under the Wai Connection project, we were lucky enough to be able to produce a scoping document that sets out the planned phase 1 or proof of concept development for the sites and a roadmap for future phases. The CBM portal is where people can go to find out more about what sites already exist out there in sort of webland. So that's about connecting folk to existing sites that show or store monitoring that's done by groups in the terrestrial, marine or freshwater areas. So that's really about helping to make those sites more visible to groups. The focus of this webinar, however, is about the image on the right, which is the CBFM website, and I'll just take you through a few more slides about the scoping of that. So the intent of the CBFM website is to build a collective understanding of the state of our waterways to empower and inspire action towards a healthier future. It's certainly targeted at catchment or community groups. You know, really this is about anyone who's out there collecting freshwater monitoring data. The sites will build on the great mahi that's already been done by others. That includes the National CBM QA framework that Juliet's just taken us through. And, you know, that is really a key part of our design principle, that we're, our approach and our language that we're using is closely linked to and builds on that guiding document. The site will also link to other key freshwater sites and resources that may be of help to groups. That includes things such as the ACE database, the Healthy Waterways Land Management Actions website, even the NZARM resources page, just to name a couple of those. And it can also be a place for groups to share their stories and plan activities. As I've said, the primary audience are groups that are out there collecting data on the hour, but there's also secondary and tertiary users of the site that are relevant to consider. And together they sort of take us through that sliding scale of active through to passive users. The need for such a site can be broken down into 3 key areas. First and foremost, it will help to give effect to the principles of Te Mana o Te Wai, not only through supporting group action, but by improving access to information. Secondly, it can help to meet that data gap for national freshwater monitoring should groups choose to share their data. And I'm sure that Juliet, you'll probably back me up on this, but I think that one of the key reasons for the development of the national QA framework was to help with community-based monitoring being suitable for filling that data gap. And if we kind of think back to that fantastic slide that Juliet had that showed the huge number of sites that was being monitored by a catchment collective, that's really powerful stuff there. And then finally, I think we all recognise that there's been an increase in the public's interest and awareness of environmental issues, and there's more people taking part in citizen science. And a site like this can really support them and give them recognition for the great mahi that they're doing in their own time. And I think that's something that's really worthwhile keeping in mind. There's this balance between having groups and their volunteer efforts helping to plug data gaps, and I think that's a really great bonus, but this should be about having to raise our collective understanding of the environment around us and supporting those groups that are so passionate about finding out more. So can data be more than just numbers on a screen? Can they actually be a catalyst for change? To work out the potential reach of the sites, we did a collation of 9 groups active in Aotearoa, and this was based on an online search of websites and databases and an online survey for community catchment groups, and that was facilitated by Wai Connection provider organisations. So currently this number sits at just over 1,400 9 groups, although that number's probably a little bit underestimated. Our initial search probably didn't include all the possible classifications that we discovered later on. And so looking at those, when we break those groups down into their group type or their environmental focus area, we were able to start to get a better feel for the classification of those groups. From those group classifications, we were then able to work out that about half of them would have a direct interest in the CBFM website, and those are the ones on the left-hand side of the screen. They're the groups that have a freshwater focus or an environmental or mixed focus that could include freshwater, and group types that more relate to those community catchment group sort of classifications. The other half on the right-hand side would probably consider those more like indirect or passive users of the CBFM site. They're the groups that more relate to practitioners or single focus groups like predator trapping. And they're ones that have an environmental focus in the marine or terrestrial areas. So overall, it's not a bad number of potential direct and indirect users of the CBFM site, and obviously all of those groups would probably be interested in the CBM portal as well. And I think that once we do an additional search of others, that number could probably just tweak up a little bit. With the need and the reach of the website established, we then went on to the next phase of the scoping document, which was to establish the design principles of the site. First one of these is a user-focused design, and that's a key consideration. It means taking into account the end user participant and data considerations. This will mean that the website's easy to interact with, leading to outputs that are accurate but also easily understood. And this is because the term accessible and usable citizen science data, that refers not only to its ability to be viewed, but that the data outputs are easily understood. That improves motivation to keep programs going, it helps people to feel connected with the information, and it fosters a more eco-literate society. So successful user experience design is really key to encouraging user uptake and engagement in the site. So to maximise efficiencies, we're actually building on a body of work that's already been developed. So Juliet's taken us through that quality assurance framework, and that's the approach and the language that we'll be looking to use here, and certainly to link and build on that guiding document. The Survey 123 forms that she took us through that were developed as part of that process, we can also use that as a launching point for data collection here. So I think that's a great first step. We'll also build on a body of spatial mapping and data analysis work that we've developed as part of the Wai Connection project. And that's the Focus Catchment Map Series work that's been mentioned, and I'll sort of go through that in a second presentation today. And that not only improves our development efficiencies, but it builds on the data sharing corridor that we've been having as part of the development of that map series. Technology decisions are made with a balance between value for money, accessibility, maintainability, and fit for purpose. That ensures ongoing engagement from both a technical and non-technical user point of view. Data storage, ownership, privacy, they're all obviously key principles when developing data management processes. And we all know that anything that we build needs to be commercially viable if it's going to last the test of time. As part of the scoping, we also undertook an accelerated discovery phase using the Agile Kickstart framework. Through this, we developed the minimum viable product and solution design. The outcomes and artifacts of that then inform the estimated investment and effort required to develop and maintain the website for a phase 1 development. And honestly, I think if you think that science has a lot of jargon, I have decided that IT beats us every time on that. In terms of the backlog visualization, we had an initial wireframe mock-up of the website structure that was developed in Miro, and then we further finessed that by a series of workshops. That framework was then used to map high-level epics and features using a story mapping process informed by the user group's needs and key flows. Then using the outputs from the story mapping process, the Moscow prioritization framework was used to categorize the high-level features into must have, should have, could have, and won't have. And these were then used to work out what could be included in the phase 1 development versus later development phases. So now I've just rocked through those slides, which is just some of the components of the CBFM scoping document. At the moment, that document is with our MFE, and our next steps are to seek funding and support to make the site a reality. So I guess just watch the space and look out for updates on the Wai Connection website. So I'm just going to leap into the next presentation, which is to talk a little bit more about the Focus Catchment Map series. Kim's already told you about the Wai Connection project and how EOS is providing the national technical support for that. And one of the key outputs for that support is the production of a Focus Catchment Map series. The intent of the map series is to bring together data available from a myriad of online sources into one place. All the information that we present is ultimately available online, but it would be a Herculean effort for each group to have to search for and collate all of that information on their own, let alone doing it in their spare time. So, you know, we thought that this could be a good opportunity for us to help with that process. The document's pretty sturdy. It's got over 90 pages and 30 maps in an A3 output. Its current format's a PDF and a bound print. Although the comment has been made, it could possibly be used as a coffee table as well. The map series is based on a Kutakitai approach, so it's based on providing knowledge at the catchment level, being able to work through options for improving the health of our waterways. It really does need to be done at the scale of the catchment rather than the site, and this map series reinforces that approach. It's broken down into 6 sections that take you on a journey through the catchment. It starts at that broader parent catchment view. And we put that in there because sometimes the focus catchment could actually be part of a much larger catchment. It then goes through factors affecting catchment processes and land management aspects, and that's based on model data available at a national level. We then move into the monitoring and ecological data, and that's taken from data collected by Regional Council for Water Quality and Invertebrates and from national data sets for fish. And it ends with how your catchment is connected to the coast. The map series was developed in consultation with the representative catchment group and a regional council. With so much going on in the space, including the catchment context, challenges and values process to be rolled out by regional councils, it was really important to us that we weren't reinventing the wheel or conflicting with other information that might be going out into the public arena. However, because we were developing the map series before the Wai Connection provider organisations had developed their regional needs assessments, we were unable to work with a wide range of groups and councils during that development phase. But we did get approval from MFE to work with one representative catchment group and a regional council, and that was the Hakataramia Sustainability Collective and Environment Canterbury. And whilst there was a little bit of nervousness from both parties at the start, the collaborative process, I think, worked really well. And I think everyone was pleased with the output that we were able to achieve. During the development, we looked at over 150 different online data sources. As we are developing the map series to be rolled out across the country, we did need to ensure that we could roll this out in an efficient and consistent manner. We wanted the map series to be relevant to each catchment, but we also wanted to ensure that the information we were showing was consistent at both that national and that regional level, so that a group sharing their map series with a group in another part of the country would see the same type of information presented in the same way. In a sense, we wanted to compare apples with apples. This meant that the data we ultimately used was either data available at a national or a regional level. With such a massive body of data to bring together, we needed to look at ways of working smarter. We rely heavily on GIS and FME processes to pull together data from a range of different sources. For most of the national databases, we can pull that data directly from their sites at places such as the LCDB layer and the REC layer. Some data sources such as NIWA, they're just not accessible via this kind of automated access, and so for those we're sent Excel files which we can then input into the FME workbenches. With these kinds of data sets, we can then set up our workbenches to effectively run unchanged as we produce each map series across the country. There are then the regionally specific GIS processes used to pull data direct from each regional council. This goes through a more bespoke process as each region manages their data just slightly differently. And of course, it also involves korero with each council to first establish their comfort level with the style of data sharing and with what we're doing. Once that's been set up for a region, we can then use that FME process for any map series produced within that region. There's more complex processes for pulling public fish data from the New Zealand Freshwater Fish Database and World Lab sites. I won't bore you with the details of that today, but needless to say, through the development phase, we've set up these systems and processes and established our internal QA/QC protocols to ensure efficiencies as well as ongoing data integrity. Okay, so what does the document actually look like? The design of the map series itself follows a similar development approach as the data analysis did. Given its large size and the national rollout, we developed a layout that allows us to replace key information and imagery whilst retaining some of the more general descriptive copy. Each section starts off with a spread that introduces the topic, then the map spreads for that section follow on. And each section is also colour coded so that the reader can easily see what section they're in. Each map is presented as a two-page spread with the facing page showing the data that's visually displayed on the map. We've tried to present each map spread in a pretty consistent fashion so that the reader will find the same type of information in the same location for a map spread. The one that I'm showing here is one of the more simple layouts from section 2 and 3. This is where the data is mapped to either the streamline, which is what we can see here, or to the catchment layer. And the data presented in these two sections is all via model data taken from nationally recognised layers and data sets. As we move into the ecological data sections, that's the section 4 and 5, things get just a little bit more complicated, but the layout still retains that consistency with those earlier sections, allowing readers to still find the information in the same places. For water quality and invertebrate data, we've split the data into that presented via LAWA. That's the table at the top. And then we have the other non-LAWA sites that are sampled by regional council underneath. The NOF interpretation bands, we only use those for the LAWA data in the top table, and the LAWA data in those NOF bands, they're actually presented exactly as they come to us in the data set, so we don't fiddle around with that at all. We've found that the other data that's collected by regional councils, that's really useful to fill in some of the gaps from the LAWA data. And these other sites we display as dots on the map, but in the table output, we group them by the REC land use classification. And this means that the groups can still see patterns in the data, but the table isn't showing the site-specific data results. And that was one of the key, some of the key feedback from our catchment group during the development phase. The last section is about connecting the focus catchment to what's going on at the coast. This is because, as I've said, the focus catchment can sometimes be, a long way away from the coast, and we wanted a way to get people thinking about their connection to the sea. For these maps, we use a mix of model data and monitoring data collected by regional council, but unlike the other sections, this section we actually roll them out with those maps set at that regional level so that the reader can compare coastal data relevant to their catchment with other coastal sites in the region. It also means if their focus catchment doesn't have any coastal data available, they can see what the coastal data is looking like across the rest of the region. Peppered throughout the document, there are several notes and flags to point out caveats around the data sets we've used or disclaimers to remind the reader about the context for use of the map series. Just a few examples. We've got one that relates to the fact that the map series is done at the catchment level. That means it won't always be accurate at that site-specific level. One of the others is around the fact that the map series won't always have data at a scale suitable for individual freshwater farm plans. Again, that was a choice we made during the development phase because we didn't want to duplicate or conflict with what others are doing in that space. Getting the final focus catchment map series output, that's just one part of the delivery process. There's a number of key steps along the way where we connect in with the Wai Connection provider organisations, and we usually do that using online GIS tools that assist us and them. And those are available through a provider portal login area on the Wai Connection website. We also take the provider organisation through their map series to help them understand it a little bit more. And that's where we can point out some of the key things that we've seen when we've read the document. We then give them some guidance on how to run the map series workshop with their catchment group. And in Waitaha, Canterbury, we're lucky enough that our science team can actually help our coordinators to run those group workshops as well. And the provider organisations can also see how their map series is tracking via an online progress dashboard. And again, that's available through that login provider portal section of the Wai Connection website. We've also produced a number of other outputs that help the provider organisations better understand and communicate the map series with their groups. And so along with those workshops, these help to provide a nice wraparound support so that the focus catchment map series is more than just a document. Ultimately, the process we've set up for this map series gives us that leg up in relation to the development of the CBFM website that I talked about earlier. With a lot of the map visuals, the science communication and automated data collection processes established here, able to be utilised in that future endeavour. So that takes us to the end of the presentation portion of the webinar. Hopefully I've whipped through those fast enough to give us time for a Q&A session. So Eliza, I will stop sharing and hand back to you.
Awesome, thanks Shelley. We do have a couple of questions here. So let's see, for the first one, do you have any examples of successful outcomes from communities using these tools?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. When we've produced the focus catchment map series and we've gone down and had the workshop, we've had some really good feedback and some really good korero from the groups about the data that's in there. One of the groups has used that as their basis for their catchment management planning. Another group, we're going to be going down shortly to kind of do a site walkover of their catchment, focusing on some of the key things that have been identified in the map series. And others are using it to look at where the data gaps are, and so are taking that next step to either inform where they would like to have more monitoring done or are looking at, hey, what's the other data beyond regional council data that we know is available, and what can we do about pulling all of that information into a cohesive place. And I think the how people are using it and interacting with it, you know, differs depending on what the focus of the catchment group is and what the factors are affecting their sort of management of that catchment.
Well, thank you. Another one here about the QA framework. How does this handle potential discrepancies in data interpretation between community and professional scientists?
Okay, well, the CBM, the QA framework is all about planning your monitoring and collecting the data. It is not interpretation of what you find, that the data is beyond the scope of the framework. But I mentioned at the end of the presentation that we're just embarking on a piece of work now to produce some guidance to help groups support them with interpretation of the data, and the website Shelley's discussed will also have science-based information to inform what the data means.
Awesome. One here, is the Water Citizens Portal going to be phased out as catchment groups begin to use the Survey 123 forms?
I might just comment on that one because I was working with NIWA. The Water Citizens Portal, for those of you who are familiar with it, was created by NIWA in collaboration with a number of regional councils, and it only holds data from the Stream Health Monitoring Assessment Kit, the SHMAC kit. Now, things like the CBM framework and the Survey 123 framework is much bigger. It's accommodating lab-based measurements, eDNA, all kinds of things like that in terms of what people are doing with freshwater monitoring. It's NIWA still to make a decision what they will do with that existing portal. But Shelley, do you want to perhaps comment on the idea of linking with sites?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Juliet. The intent of the CBFM website is not a monster that's taking over control of other existing sites. There's a lot of fantastic sites out there that are collecting community-based monitoring, and so one of the development steps and in the architecture for the design is the ability to, if other sites want to share their information through, then is there a way that we can look to have a data sharing agreement so that can come through to the site should they choose to do that. So we're trying to create a sort of a cohesive place for this information, but we don't want to take over what others are doing. And so some groups may choose to stay if the NZ Water Citizens continues to continue. They may choose to stay there, which is totally fine. And we will just reach out to any of those sites as well. And we've got a couple of sites where we've got water clarity monitoring data and school-based monitoring data, and we'll look at ways of is there the ability for that to be pulled in to try and create more of a cohesive picture for data sets.
Cool. Another one here, how do you link the CBM to value setting in catchments? A comment that values and therefore objectives would shape the design process.
I'll start by initial comment and the others can chip in if they wish. So what we did, I didn't actually mention it, so that's a good question. The 28 indicators that we've built into the CBM framework are relevant to the mandatory freshwater values enshrined in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. So aquatic ecosystem health, recreation, and hinga kai and threatened species. A number of those indicators are all relevant to those values, and we did that deliberately so that this did align up, particularly with the ecosystem health value. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Shelley?
And look, I apologise to the person that asked the question if I'm not quite answering it, but just to sort of add on to what Juliet was saying, the intent of the Focus Catcher Map series and what will hopefully sort of eventuate through to the CBFM website is to try and build up that picture of knowledge and understanding of the catchment. So there's a bunch of data available at that sort of catchment level that almost sets the scene, sets the ground rules for what can occur, you know, within that system. These systems are defined ultimately by climate topology, geology, those types of things, and there's a lot that you can learn about and understand about how a system functions from those, and then you can compare based on what those things are telling you about what the system would be like, you know, what is it like now as a result of other things going on in the catchment. So by building up those layers, you can build up the level of understanding and start to see where things may be, where you can identify areas that might require a little bit more support. And then in terms of how you're tying that into you know, different standards. We've obviously got a set of national standards, there's a set of regional standards, and a lot of the, you know, if it remains in place, the process under Essential Freshwater is about communities working with council and iwi to develop what they consider to be, you know, their bottom line, their sort of guidelines that they're wanting to achieve, and we're being careful that we're seeing the difference between national guidelines, which, you know, are set at that national level versus what's set at a regional level, and then versus what's set at a catchment based level based on desires from catchment groups. So hopefully I didn't go off off-piste on that answer too much.
We'll do a couple more questions. So what kind of data sets are integrated into these map series, and how will these resources be updated in time?
That's a good question. We start out, and this is just going off the top of my head because I don't have it sitting in front of me, but as I mentioned, we use the top 4 classifications from the REC layer, so climate, topography, geology, and land use classification. So that's the scene setting for what's information, model data that's attached to the waterway line, to the REC layer. We then run through things like the LCDB, soils layer, protected areas, threatened, percentage of threatened areas, and those types of things are covered based on the catchment land itself. And then we move into some modelled sediment load data, so looking at what's the modelled sediment load coming out of each of the tributaries that then discharge into the main stem within the catchment, and then we move into the actual data, which is fish, invertebrate, water quality data collected by regional councils, and we've picked key ones for that, and because we are presenting LIWA sites for that, we have used parameters that have guidelines set from LIWA under Essential Freshwater. So I think it's dissolved reactive phosphorus, nitrate, nitrogen, and turbidity, clarity, and a few others that I know I'm missing out on. And then the coastal stuff is looking at the percentage of mud that's in the coastal areas, looks at the hydromorphic systems, the modelled sediment loads out to the coast, and then there's the fecal coliform indicators, some nutrients, phosphorus and nitrates and things like that. So it's not, we went through, and when we were working through with the catchment group as well during the development, we were sort of working with them in terms of which ones they wanted to have in there. And there were some that they suggested that weren't included because they felt that it would end up in a situation where you're starting to alienate people from interacting with the document. So, you know, this document is very much about sharing information and trying to increase the general knowledge about, you know, a whole sort of catchment ecosystem. So there's potentially some layers that people would consider, oh, why haven't you got those in there? And some of those was because we're wanting to bring everybody along on the journey and try and increase the base knowledge to then move on from there.
Awesome, thank you. We got a couple more questions, but I think we'll leave it there. And any of those that we didn't answer today, I'm sure either, you know, the team here can provide some written answers to them. But thank you everyone for attending and registering, and thank you Kim, Juliet and Shelley for your time today. The webinar has been recorded and it will be available on the NZARM website shortly. Awesome, thank you and have a great rest of the day.
Brilliant, thanks Eliza.